Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and as you can see, we have a special guest tire. In fact, we're at the special guest tire shop, Mr. Joe Messenger. Joe, thank you so much for doing the show today.
Thanks, Tim.
Oh, you're
Thanks
welcome. Now, it's a pleasure to be here, and this is going to be part of a special two-part series. This is part one, and in this one, Joe's going to be tying one of his father's flies, the Irresistible.
Right.
Stay tuned. All right, let's give everyone a quick sneak peek of the fly that we're going to be tying. Joe, this is the Irresistible, and this is your dad's creation from, geez, what year would you even say that was?
Well, he started tying the fly in the 1930s, the early 30s, really. It's kind of a spin-off of a bass fly he tied called the Night Hummer. It had a deer hair body. The only thing it didn't have was the hackle on it. It had deer hair wings, but he called it a deer hair drake fly, and that's what he marketed it at. Well, later on, a friend of his bought some flies off of him, and this was in the early 40s, and some of his drake flies went to Canada and wrote back and said, could you send some more of your drake flies? The trout up here find them to be irresistible. He thought, well, that sounds a little better than drake fly.
And the rest
so the name stuck.
Jeez.
And so it's been around in this version. And the basic difference, everybody ties irresistibles now, or a lot of people, but the lateral color separation is what made his kind of unique, and as well as the method. But it's caught fish all over the world, and been in just about everybody's fly box. And interestingly enough, for a long time, Dad was the only one that tied.
Jeez. Well, I think what you're talking about, the technique, we're going to be showing everybody that technique. And the tying procedures are going to look a little bit different, because I'm going to be doing an over-the-shoulder shot of Joe tying this because of the way he ties it. So the tail is going to be, you know, pretty much the typical tail that you see people tie. The wings and the hackle, it's going to be typical of a lot of dry flies. You'll see a lot of Joe's little tricks and his techniques in those. But we're really going for the feature of this body, because of that lateral line is really unique, and the way that he shows that method is going to be something that I guarantee 99.9% of you have never seen before, and you may never see again. It's a really unique method. So I guess we'll change this camera a little bit, and we'll kind of show you tying this fly for everybody, if that's okay.
All right, fine, thanks.
All right, we have a little different setup this time because of the way that Joe ties his fly. So Joe, we're ready to tie the Irresistible. Why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about this hook?
Well, in tying deer hair, there's a little bit of muscle involved in it. So rather than use a standard dry fly hook, I've got a nymph hook here. It's a size 12 Tiemco 5262, which is a 2X long hook, but the wire's stout enough that I can tie the body on it without bending the hook. So I'll start out, I'm just using 8/0 Unifred on the thing. I don't want to build too much bulk because I already have some, so standard knot there, and bring it back to about a point halfway between the point of the hook and the barb of the hook. That's a pretty good reference, and run it up. Now, for the tail and the wings on this, I have some whitetail neck hair here. It doesn't flare as much, which we really don't want in the tail or the wing. You don't want it to look like a paintbrush. So I always try and take a little bit more than I think I'm going to need, because I'm going to lose some. And the fuzz that's in it, there's really not a lot in that neck hair, but it still doesn't hurt to take a comb, and if nothing else, it lines the hair, and I get a little bit of fuzz out of it there. And pull some wild hairs out. And I'll use my hair stacker here.
Okay.
When you stack hair, you really shouldn't just hold the stacker by the base of it, because the barrel will bounce up and down trap hair under there and it won't stack. So I just put my finger on top of it and give it a few taps, and we'll see what it looks like. Not too bad, but sometimes it doesn't stack evenly because these tips are all out of alignment. I'll stack it once and then just trim them off there and stack it again, and usually you get a pretty good stack out of it.
So you just trim the base of them.
The base,
Them just flush across, just so you can do a restack.
So those tips aren't catching on one another. It depends on the hair, but anyhow, that should do it. I want to make the tail about the same length as the hook shank, and you know, that's sort of arbitrary because some people like it longer and some shorter. Actually, I'll probably try and make it a little bit longer because the body of fly, the center of gravity there is forward, so it'll tend not to spin quite as much if you have a little longer tail.
Okay.
So I've got that. That's about the hook shank length. I'll set it in there and measure it. Now I don't want to fool around trimming it too much so I'll just clip that off and start out with an easy loop there and pull up on it and bind that down pretty well. And then as I come back, I want to back off on the pressure because the more I squeeze it, if I squeeze it too tightly, it's going to flare too much. But if I lift up on the tail, that'll keep it on the top of the hook and I won't have as much flare. Then as I come back up the hook, so that's what I'll do there. It's still flared a bit, but when I put the body on now, I'm going to tie it off, which is something you don't do with standard dry flies. Usually you put the thread on it and leave it on there until you finished it. So that's the tail for the thing. And then I'll have to move my vise here to use this method that my dad originated to tie the body on. So I'll move the vise and we'll come back and tie the body on it.
All right, we've changed the camera angle now, and it's really because of this technique that Joe's going to be showing us. The one thing that I will also mention, I love that Joe talked a little bit about the neck hair of deer and how it's not going to flare as much, but I think if you look back and you watch them tying that tail, remember it's still going to flare a little bit. So if you got your hopes up thinking you found the magic material, there's no such thing yet. But now let's jump over to this next technique. And Joe, what can you tell us about this technique before we start doing it?
Well, to tie the body on it was my dad's method of tying. Now, back in the time that he began tying flies, they weren't able to separate colors laterally. Spinning hair, you could separate it radially, but he kind of liked having the lateral separation. So that's the method that he developed, and it's a series of knots that holds the hair on in bunches as I go up the hook shank. And the knots oppose one another, and you'll see as I tie it, there's a little more to it than that, how it's a pretty sturdy setup. The thread can break anywhere along in the body there, and the rest of the fly will remain intact. To tie it, I'm using size 8 rod winding thread.
Okay.
It's a little stronger than you typically use on dry flies, but because of the hair, and also because of the knots, so they don't slip, I have it's just paraffin and beeswax, and I'll wax this thread because it's not a pre-waxed thread. Helps hold the knots better. The other problem is it takes 3 hands to tie this thing. Since most of us aren't equipped that way, I got to use my teeth. I want to make sure I have plenty of thread. I'm not worried about wasting thread, but as I work my way up the hook shank, if I don't have a long enough tag in, it makes it very difficult to tie the knots. So
okay, and the camera's not picking that up, so all the viewers, so you understand what's going on, in Joe's lap right now, between his 2 hands, he probably has a good 2 feet of this size A rod binding thread, and there's another maybe 1.5 feet that goes off to a spool on the right hand side. So this isn't under tension or anything yet. It's just a really late, maybe a 3.5 foot long section.
Yeah, somewhere there.
Hanging loose right now as he prepares to use this technique that's a really, really unique one.
It's, I have the standing in which goes to the threads Tim mentioned. and the tag end, which is to my left here, which you probably can't see.
Okay.
But anyhow, I'll put this in my teeth, and Dad, the most popular Irresistible that he tied, or color of it, was a dun colored back and a white belly. All of them had light or white colored abdomens or bellies. Mm-hmm. And I'll just clip a small bunch of hair off here, cut it down towards the base towards the hide, because the hair you want to use is really the hair that's most hollow, if that's the right term, which is at the base or the butts of the hair. The tips, not so much, and they won't flare as well. So I've gotten them out cut there. I'm just going to clip off enough hair so I don't end up with a big hairball here. When I finish, it makes it a little easier to control. And I'll start my thread right where my tie-in point is. I'm going to take an extra wrap around it. I'll hold the thread in my left hand, set it in there vertically, and take a wrap around it, and come around and roll, I'll roll it off my finger. Then I'll just tie a single overhand loop, knot rather. All I'm doing is reaching across, picking up the tag end, pulling it down right in that fold of hair, and tightening it. Not real tight, just snug. Now that in itself is not very strong, but I'll rotate the vise 180 degrees, push this hair down, cross this standing end over to my left, and the tag end over towards my right, and then pull on it. Now you'll see as I build it, it'll cause it to flare a little better than it already has, but also I can adjust it if I need to center it there by just pulling on one side or the other. Same thing with the white hair, and this is white deer body hair, this belly hair here, and there again, stand up, cut it down close, get rid of the fluff there. You can do it with your fingers or a comb. I kind of like using a comb because it aligns the hair and it pulls out the bad stuff there that won't float very well. Again, I'll clip the butt ends off just so I don't have such a big bunch of hair there to try and trim.
I'm really glad to see you do that, because I'm one of those people. Sometimes I'll trim one side, but I tend to leave it long.
Right.
And that's a really great tip for others out there.
Well, yeah, it's a little easier to see, to reference it when you do that.
Okay.
Back in my teeth, set it in, and take a wrap around it. I don't need to go through twice as I did. Now when I get over here, if I just pull it straight through, it's going to pick up the dark hair. So I'll lift up and roll it off my index finger, and then tie this knot, and just give it a little slack and pick that up and pull it right down in the fold. If you don't get it in the fold there, it tends to make a knot there and it won't trim very well for you. Rotate the vise, push the hair back down, and standing end over to my left, tag end over to my right, and you can, as you build it, you can kind of work in between the colors there and pull down. Now that compacts the hair. You can use, I won't use it right now, but I can use a packer, which I've just got a ballpoint pen here.
Sure.
So I'll do another bunch of the done here.
This is a really cool method. I love that it's separating those colors, and we're really going to have that dark color off the back, that light off the belly. And I think it probably intrigues a lot of people whenever they look at the picture to think, how's he going to separate these colors that way?
Yeah.
And it's neat to see this. It's almost, you're just locking one in on the top, then one in on the bottom, and you're going back and forth. That's a really cool method.
Well, the bodies, if you're using this method on the Irresistible or bass bugs or whatever, the bodies are seldom ever will twist on it, which only means better durability.
Sure.
As I build the body here, I can use a little bit more hair. I didn't want to start out with a big bunch. Same thing again. I always want to make sure I have the tag or the loose end on my right.
So in your mouth is always the standing end. That's the end that goes back to the bobbin, or to the thread, I should say.
Yeah. Set it right down in between the two. Come around. Don't pull on it or you'll pull the hair there. I'll wait till I'm around at 180 degrees and then add a little pressure. Lift it up. Rotate it off my index finger and tie that knot right in the center of the bundle. Rotate the vise so that now my standing end's on the right and the tag end's on the left. And I can work the thread in between the colors there. The standing end to my left, the tag end to my right, and pull it down. You can kind of see the hair flare there, and I can center it. And then, if you care to, you don't really have to, but it doesn't hurt to pack it a little bit. And I think packers, I have a very small end on this. If you have something with a big surface there, you really need to compact it at the hook and not around the whole rim of the hair there. It's kind of lost effort. So whether it be for something this small or for a bass bug, I'd rather have a packer with a pretty small opening in it so I can do that. I know a lot of others use different.
There's all kinds of packers out there.
Yeah, and everybody has their own system.
They do, and I love to see the brush that you use to get all the underfur out, because I have an old comb, one of those combs they give you in the, whenever you were a little kid and you were getting your pictures taken at school.
Right.
That's the comb that I have, and I'm looking at this that you're using. I see the brand name, it's Conair on it.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice looking comb, just very fine.
Yeah, I got
pulls that stuff out.
I actually, for the bass flies, I'll use a bigger comb.
Okay.
Because I'm using a little coarser hair for it. But for this, and I have too much there, I can see that right off. Pretty easy to get rid of it. But I've aligned it and pulled some of the fuzz out of it, or all of it, hopefully. And if you kind of stroke the hair with your fingers, there, it helps straighten out. So you don't want to handle deer hair any more than you possibly have to. The more you do, the more trouble you're going to get into, whether it's taking it out of a stacker or whatever you're doing. So, and I want to position it. If I would hold the hair like that when I set it, I can't see what I'm doing. I can't get to.
Okay.
I just need to put it at a little bit of an angle there, and then I'll get the thread back in my teeth. And same thing, repetition. Set it down, push down, come around, don't pull on it yet. When you get over there, give it a tug, lift it up and come off your index finger. Tie the knot right down in the center of it and pull it and rotate it and cross it over. I think you can see the color separation.
Oh, we definitely can.
There already. And really, I've got just about enough. You know, typically, one of the mistakes in tying flies is crowding the hook on the things. And you need a little bit of room there between the, after I put the wings on it and then the hackle. So I'm in pretty good shape right there. I'm just going to tie this off. I have enough hair on here now. And to finish it off, I'll just tie an overhand knot and go through it twice. Go through the loop twice. And now I'm going to elevate the thread so I don't catch too much hair and pull it to where it's taut, but I want to slide it down on the side of the hook towards me and tighten it. And that's it for tying it off. I'll clip the ends off and then I'll take it out of the vise to trim it. Now a lot of tires don't with trimming deer hair stuff, but I find it's the way I've always done it. I find it easier to get it more symmetrical by taking it out of the vise. So I'm going to take my vise down here and A lot of times you watch people that are kind of new at deer hair tying. They're way too delicate with it. I'll start out just taking little snips. Well, you'll be there all day. I just want to cut some reference points. Normally I'll hold it over a wastebasket, but you wouldn't be able to see it. So I'm going to reach in, and I guess it takes a little practice to know how much to cut off, and take a fair amount of hair out of there. I don't want to cut the tail off, so I'll come in at that angle. I'll get that side just somewhere close, and then do the same thing on the other side using the shank of the hook as a reference. But you can see I'm taking a fair amount of hair off.
You are. So you're holding it so the eye's facing you.
Right.
You're kind of holding it by the tail, and you're really just getting pretty close to the hook already just by those initial cuts.
Yeah, yeah, and there again, it's just reference points. Now, I want to slope it back, but I don't want to cut the tail off, and I have that sort of captured in between my fingers there.
Okay.
And then slide the scissors in so that I don't cut the tail off, and try and get some of the loose ends. Turn it over and do the same thing on the underside of it. Now, I usually try to trim the underside so that it's a little bit thinner than the back, so the fly sits down in the surface film a little bit better. And these are only reference cuts. Some of the hair that's in the front here, I'll just come around and trim it off. Now, with tying deer hair, you can spend an inordinate amount of time if you're really trying to be particular with them. If the object is to take them fishing, then don't worry about it too much. I'm going to go to a smaller pair of scissors so I can get some of that. I'll even sometimes use a razor blade on these things. And holding it at this angle is a little bit, I usually hold it up closer to me, but there again you wouldn't be able to see it, so I'll get in there and try and clip some of that out. You're going to lose probably a little bit of tail hair there. That's why I kind of add a little bit more. I can see it's not very symmetrical. So, and by holding it in my hand as opposed to in a vise, I can turn it at different angles and get a better view of it. Sometimes if you just trim at one angle, it looks like you've done a pretty good job of it until you look at it at another angle, and then you see you have it.
I notice those are curved scissors.
Yeah, it sort of gives me an automatic taper to the body there with the curve. You wouldn't necessarily have to have them, but I'm getting pretty close there, and probably from a functional standpoint, there's always a few you have to wrestle with there to get some of the body hair clipped off.
Okay. Well, I think you gave everyone at least an idea of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So we'll how about we'll let you kind of finish that off, make it look a little more aesthetically pleasing for the camera, and then we'll finish the rest of the fly.
All right.
Okay. So we have the fly back in the vise because Joe's finished trimming it. The one thing that I do want to point out, whenever we think about the body for a dry fly, a really common term out there is the carrot style taper, where it's kind of a thinner taper. This one's a little bit wider than that. I would call this a chubby carrot. Joe, what do you think is the rationale behind that style of taper?
Well, I think that my dad's idea was to make a pretty good chunk of food there for a trout, as opposed to a Catskill dry fly. He wanted something that looked like it would be a meal, and I guess that was his logic behind it. It also aids in flotation. The fly floats well to begin with, but the little bigger body than normally you would use on a dry fly also helps. So in fast water, you don't really even have to use much floating, and it'll stay on top. But I think that was the design that my dad had in mind.
Okay, well, I guess let's finish this fly with
all right, I'll start it with my 8/0 thread once again, and just get a base there with a jam knot and clip that off, and I'll run it back about halfway between the body and the eye of the hook. And I'm going to use the same hair that I used for the tail, which is whitetail neck hair because it doesn't flare as much. And of course I'll use a bit more, and I'll take more than I think I'll actually need because I'll eliminate a good bit of it as I stack it and tie it on. Cut it off at the base there, and I'll comb it out to get some of the fluff, or all of it hopefully, the fuzz out from it. And also, well, combed it a little too hard. Also realign the hair there. I can still recover from that, believe it or not, I think. This comb is really fine-toothed, and if you don't grip it tight enough, the hair, that's what will happen.
Yeah, it just grabs it, doesn't it?
But I'm still in pretty good shape. That's why I cut a little more. I didn't think I was going to lose that much. But I'll trim some of the butts off of it there and put it in my stacker.
I really like that tip you gave before about holding the top of the stacker. That was a really
Yeah,
slick tip.
it will, especially on the bigger stackers. It'll trap the tips of the hair in between the base and the barrel of the thing, and you really won't get a very good even stacking out of it. We'll see what it looks like. That's not too bad, but just for the sake of doing it again, I'll do it again and trim those ends off so they don't catch on one another. Stack it again, and here's something that I think will help you. As I mentioned before, don't handle deer hair any more than you have to. If I took the hair out that way in my left hand, I'd have to reverse the ends. I want the tips forward, and chances are I'm going to make it uneven again and lose a good bit of it. So I'll just turn the stacker and take it out and grab it. That way I don't have to reverse it. I want to check it to see, I want about the length of the hook shank there, or a little bit shorter. I don't like real long wings on them because it'll make the fly spin and twist your leader if they're too long. So I'm about there. I don't want to go in there and have to trim all around that body any more than I possibly have to. So I'm going to trim it off there about where I need it, and I'll set it in on the hook shank about even with the body, and take a turn of the thread with my left hand and then pull up, and the same thing, and make sure I have it secured pretty well there. And then I'll transfer hands and go ahead and bind it down a little bit better. And I don't want to put thread in front of it until I've got it pretty well tied down and back, or it'll push the hair back out from it. So then I'll come forward and build a little thread dam there in front.
Now, let me stop you for a second. I really liked how when you had that deer hair and you were initially locking it in, you were pulling up on it.
Yeah.
What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I want to keep it on top of the hook shank. I don't want it to rotate around the hook
So you didn't
shank.
really want it to kind of spin around the
No, I don't.
Okay.
In this case, I don't want it to spin. I'll trim a little bit more of this off, but you don't need to worry about it too much. And then come back and I'll tie over those butt ends and get everything down pretty well. And maybe take another turn or two in front there and leave my thread there. Now I'll take my bodkin and divide the hair evenly, hopefully. I'll just separate it with the bodkin.
Yeah.
And see how that looks. It looks like I have a little bit more on the right side than do the left, so I'll grab some there. And I'll take some wraps, just easy wraps around the base of the hair. And that'll kind of bring it together. So there again, we don't have a paintbrush look. And then come around and hold the opposite wing and do the same thing. Now I don't want to make tight wraps around it or it'll make it flare like that.
So you're basically making wraps around the hair, around each one of the wings, kind of like a parachute style.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And if you pull on it too hard, as I just did, it'll come off. So it takes real gentle pressure there. Once I've got the wings divided in pretty good shape, then I'll cross wrap it.
Okay, kind of the figure eights between them.
Yeah, maybe not a figure eight so much as a cross wrap.
Okay.
In other words, I'm not going there and then back here and then back there.
You're just really going in between.
I'll go one direction and then the other. And that ought to do it. I can take another wrap or two around the front and then tilt the wings forward and bring my thread back in so I can tie my hackle in there. And if I have a few wild hairs there that I don't like, I'll trim them out now before I get the hackle in it. So I think we're pretty good shape there. I'll go ahead and start the hackle on it now.
So we have the wings in place right now, those deer hair wings. We're going to go to the hackle now. Joe, the hackle is like a claret colored hackle, and this is kind of the original. Do you want to talk just briefly about the hackle and some other color options, since I know people are going to ask, where can I get this color? And it's probably tough, so other options would be great too.
Yeah, the claret hackle was my dad's creation there. I never really knew why he chose that color, other than it remains visible, that color, as other colors fade out in the light spectrum. So maybe looking through diffused water, well, the diffused view you would have in the water, they can key on it and maybe not miss the fly quite as often. I do know that I've tied Irresistibles in about every color imaginable, and this done back, white belly, and claret hackle seems to be the most effective of those that I've tied. But because I have a pretty good gap between the wings and the body on the thing, I'll need to use two hackles that I've already selected here just to fill up the space. So I'll go ahead and start them. Nothing too special there, other than giving myself a little bit of free stem there. In other words, no barbels on the stem right there, so I can get a wrap or so around it before the hackle starts. I think they don't kind of crowd each other or overlap each other. Some, you can tie them off in front. I'm not going to on this one. I'll just tie it down pretty good and advance my thread up to the eye of the hook and tilt the wings. Now I don't want to wind both on at the same time, so I'll take the one closest to the wings. I kind of like using a rotary hackle plier. It allows me to get in there a little bit easier and around the bobbin, and not trying to wind the hackle too tight. Not trying to wind the hackle too tight to start out with, because I got another one that I got to go up there with.
Okay.
So I'm leaving a little bit of space in between, and I want to take it up to the wings, and then pull the wings back, and I'll just take one wrap, maybe two, see what it looks like. I'll take another one there and tie that off. And I'll clip it off just so I can get it out of the way.
Now, as you're advancing this second hackle, what are some other color options that people can use if they can't find this claret?
Yeah, if you're not able to use that claret color, I've heard of some people dyeing them with ladies' hair color, and there's some color that's close to that. But Dad also tied these, as do I, in ginger with a brown hackle, or even with a grizzly hackle with a gray back there. Those colors work well. There's an Adams Irresistible, they're calling it, that doesn't have deer hair wings. It's got grizzly hackle with grizzly wingtips on it. But so yeah, brown or tan or ginger, whichever you want to call it, is a good option there. But for the originals here, are trying to stick with his original pattern.
Sure.
I have a friend who dyes these for me, and works out pretty good for me.
Now I see you wrapping back and forth. Is that so they don't trap the other fibers
Yeah,
down?
I'm just trying to wiggle it so I don't capture too many of the barbels on it. And I'll take another 2 wraps up here and tie that off, and hopefully not capture too many barbs. There's I wind it, and you can tie it off in however you normally do that. You know what? I cut the thread again.
Oh no.
Well, let me just. I'll be okay. I don't know if I'm going to keep this or not. But,
Okay, so we have that second hackle locked and trimmed away. Now let's finish off the fly. If you want to kind of talk about how you like to get the knot in place, because it may be different with this fly with all this hackle versus some others.
yeah, there's a good bit of hackle up front there. With a whip finish tool, or using the whip finish with your fingers, you're probably a little more likely to capture some of that hackle there and point it forward. With a half hitch tool, you're not as likely to do that. It sort of pushes the hackle away from the hook shank, or the eye of the hook there. So just a couple of those, and tie it off and trim it. And that's about it. I'll maybe put a drop of head cement right on there, but not very much. But that should catch trout for you.
And this is the original that your father tied.
That's the original pattern, yeah. Began tying it in the 1930s there, and really didn't have a name yet, but called deer-haired drakefly, which it doesn't really look like, and it later on became the Irresistible.
Well, let's do this. How about we change the camera angle a little bit, and we'll talk to you, and we'll kind of ask you a little bit more about this fly.
Okay.
I'm sure you agree with me that watching Joe tie that fly was just really incredible. There was so much technique there. I hope you go back and watch this video a couple times, because there were so many little things that while he was tying, I just kept thinking, wow, that's really cool, and that's really smart, and that's stuff I didn't always think of. So thank you, first of all.
Sure.
Second of all, let's talk a little bit about this fly and your dad too, because while you were tying it, you were able to give us a little bit of the history, how the name came to be. But let's start with your dad. What can you tell us about him?
Well, Dad was born in 1892, and he grew up in a small town in West Virginia. Today we have a world of information about fly tying, but if you think back to that time, there really wasn't anything. So it was his own creativity and ingenuity that he created flies, not with any particular reason in mind other than to be able to catch fish.
Sure.
And enjoy the time he spent out fishing. I think the flies he tied, and deer hair was an available source, and it wasn't. We certainly didn't have all the synthetics that we do now.
Sure.
So he made use of the materials that he had. And I think the things that he did, and yeah, it was my dad, and I'm biased, but were pretty unique in the fly itself. The flies that he tied were not only unique in their pattern, but also in the method with which he tied them. And it's kind of proven to be, the Irresistible is somewhere in the vicinity of 80 years old. His bucktail frog is 100 years old.
Jeez.
But they still would be accepted as a contemporary fly. And if you looked at some of the flies that were tied in this time period, they look like old flies. They're kind of crude.
They are. Yeah, they're just bulky in a sense.
Yeah.
Almost.
My dad was 52 when I was born. He died when I was 22. And fortunately, I was able to learn a little bit of
Quite
what
a bit.
he did.
Yeah.
And have tried to carry it on.
It's obvious that you do, and for all of you watching out there right now, understand that Joe isn't just carrying on that tradition from his father. Your son Jody also ties, and he's been tying for how long?
Since he was about 10 or 8, and he's 34 now.
Okay,
so you do the math.
Yeah, so that tradition is definitely carried on.
Yeah. Hopefully it'll keep going.
Yeah, I hope so. Let's get to the Irresistible. There's a couple questions I have for it before I'm going to let you go in this part 1. What do you think the fly imitates?
I don't think it really imitates any particular insect, although Dad initially called it a deer-hair drake fly.
Okay.
But it doesn't really resemble a drake. We have green drakes here in the east. It doesn't look like a green drake. It's more of an attractor.
Okay.
It's a buggy-looking fly. It floats very well, and it worked. So that's probably about as far as you can take it as far as trying to compare it to something. But it would look like a mayfly.
Okay. And I know lots of people out there, they're going to want to fish this. They're going to want to tie it first,
right,
and then fish it. What situations do you recommend them trying it?
The fly seems to be in its own element in fast water, in rough or broken water, because it floats very well, rides high, and it's a visible fly with, I think, the white abdomen and the black or dun colored back. There's enough contrast there, as well as that claret hackle, that they can zero in on the fly and maybe not lose it in that broken water.
Okay. Jeez. Well, we're going to stop this one right now. We're going to continue this interview in part 2, so be sure to look for that. If you have any questions or comments regarding this video, you can leave them down below in the comment section, or you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. If you'd like to watch more videos like this, you can check out troutandfeather.com. But most importantly, I just want to thank Joe for taking the time to tie this fly and share it with all of us. So Joe, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for your interest in the flies that Dad created.
Yeah, he came up with some great ones, and thanks for really sharing just all those techniques with us, because it means a lot to me, and I know it's going to mean a lot to everybody out there, just to take all this stuff that you gave us and really learn from it.
Well, I hope somebody likes it.
I guarantee we all do. Yeah, trust me, Joe. Trust me. Well, all of you, thank you so much for watching, and I guess we'll see you in part 2.